Good morning, everyone. My name is Thomas. I am a learning designer in the Center for Innovation, Learning and Teaching. I have met, I think at this point, most of you already in various other webinars. And my colleague is...
Your colleague is Shanali Govender, and I suspect that I have a little bit of a sense of who's in the room. It's great to have everyone here. Welcome, everybody. And we're talking today about group work in a very complicated space around online and blended spaces during COVID to make things exciting for all of us. Thomas, am I doing the first little bit and then you're jumping in, right? Okay, cool. In that case, what I'm going to do probably, Thomas, is can I steal? Oh, okay, there we go. Go for it. No, you're on the ball. So we're going to start with 3 questions, folks. And I would like to go through this quite quickly so we can get to some meaty issues. So 3 questions. The first question is, why do we do group work at all? Like, what's actually underneath this issue of doing group work. The second question is, how do staff experience group work? So from a staff perspective, what is going on for you in terms of group work? And then from a student perspective, how do our students perceive group work? And Thomas has popped up into the text chat for us a clickable link, which will take you to Jamboard. And when you get to Jamboard, Jamboard is a shared, it can be entirely anonymous if you open that link, if you copy and paste that link into an incognito window or a private window or one of the browsers that don't identify you, you can be entirely anonymous. And so what I would encourage you to do is to jump onto the Jamboard. Thomas, do you mind clicking us over to a Jamboard?
Sure.
Thank you very much. And if Thomas is incredibly annoying, I'm very happy to also drive. So up at the top of the screen there, you will see 2 little squares overlapping, 2 little rectangles. It says 1/5. That's how you navigate between frames. So Thomas, if you click on the right-hand arrow, you will see that each frame has a different, Shanali can't type, thank you, has
All right.
a different has a different question on it. And we're only going to look at the first 3 frames for a moment. So there are questions afterwards. We'll get to those. But let's start with the first 3 frames. And I'm going to give you 5 minutes on your own. You navigate as you wish. And what I'd like to ask you to do is to add ideas to each of those frames. So why group work, student perspectives, staff perspectives. And the way to do that is by using a sticky note. And Thomas's cursor is currently hovering over the sticky note icon in the left-hand panel. They come up in different colors. You can change colors if you're feeling fancy, and you can add your ideas. So why group work? Thomas is saying to promote cooperation and peer support. And what will happen is that thoughtfully, Jamboard will stack them all in the corner, but we'll unstack them for you. So you've got 5 minutes. And I'd like to ask you to navigate between frames 1 and 3. So you answer those 3 questions, start anywhere you like. And to navigate, it's the arrows at the top of the screen on either side of the 1/5 rectangles. Okay, so over to you for a bit. And if you are finding where we are, you go to the text chat in Zoom. There's a link there. You can either click on the link or you can copy and paste the link directly into a browser. If you copy and paste it into a incognito browser or into one of the privacy protecting browsers, you can be anonymous if you would like. Okay, so I see some ideas popping up on screen 1 around why group work, and I see some popping up on screen 2 around how staff experience group work. And I would love to see some ideas on frame 3 around what do we know about students' experience of group work. But we've got about 3 more minutes there. I like the visual, opens up our individual circles. Please feel free to use any of the other tools on the side if you'd like to experiment and play around as well. That's always awesome. Yep, you can rotate things. Okay, so what are we seeing? Cooperation.
I like that. It should not be to reduce the marking effort.
But that is sometimes what happens. All right, so we've got some wide group work ideas developing. Please make sure that you pop across to some of the other frames, frames 1 through 3, and try and answer the questions: how do staff experience group work, and how do students experience group work? Okay, yeah, got some good ideas developing. Just 1 minute longer, I think. Okay, so lots of reasons for why group work have developed. Yep, some very nice ideas there. I'm hoping that as people are adding ideas, they're getting a chance to have a little bit of a look at some of those ideas. Okay. Uh-huh. All right. So I think maybe we must move on from there a little bit. So we've got these 3 questions which I'd like us to take into our thinking today about, like, how do we work with, what can we do to make group work as positive an experience as possible, as much of a learning experience as possible. Thomas, can we just whip quickly through the next 3 slides? So some of the things that I was thinking about is that actually, oh, it's storming terribly outside. In
Yeah,
the
me too.
context, we're close enough. In the context in which most of us work these days, there's group work is almost unavoidable on some level, in the sense that knowledge is incredibly specialized and work roles are incredibly specialized. And so at any point in time where you have to carry out some kind of complex task, chances are good that you're going to end up working with other people to do it, with greater or lesser levels of success. Next slide, please, Thomas. So what was interesting to me when I was looking through some of the more recent literature, like the last, since 2018-ish, around staff experiences of group work, some of the ideas that really stood out for me was that staff think group work is critical, but it introduces some challenges. It introduces more unpredictability. Things happen in groups that very often staff don't feel trained to deal with. So unpredictable things happen in groups. It introduces human complexity. Because people are working in groups, the problems are no longer, can you design X, but can you work with these complicated human beings while you design X? There's definitely a sense of administrative overhead. managing groups, getting people into groups, getting people to connect with each other regularly, etc. And then it seems like the big one is grading challenges, that a lot of staff's difficult experiences around group work relate to managing the issues of assessment. And then our next slide just reflects on some of the key issues around students' perceptions of group work. And there's some very, very interesting work at the moment around the impact of high levels of self-efficacy on group work or on students' attitudes to group work, around, weirdly, attachment theory and group work, which I thought was a very interesting combination. And then something that someone raised very loudly in a session the other day, very clearly, and I appreciated, was the issues of introversion and extroversion as a dimension of personality and group work. And all of those have various kinds of effects, but they're not all simple or clear effects. So I think those are some of the things that we're chatting about, we want to chat a little bit about today. And I guess the most important element for me is the gap that's identified in the literature is around the teacher's role in group work assessment and around the teacher's role in enabling group work. So Thomas, if we could slip along 2 slides. Thank you very much. I'm going to start with this, give us a moment to think together about this question: how do you put groups together? And I think I would like to ask that as a question to this group as a whole. And we can think together about, in different contexts, how might we compose groups differently? So a question to the people in this class: what is your experience of constituting groups, of putting groups together? I'm wondering if you want to jump into the text chat and say something there, you're welcome to. But I would also love to hear some voices. So if anybody would like to unmute and say something about, hi, Vim.
Okay, well, I mean, I've spent quite some time trying to figure out how to set up group works for my design class, and I end up doing quite an elaborate effort of letting the students fill in a quiz where they actually also first need to get their Jung typology personality. They need to look at their preference on a checklist, as well as then I look at lots of different grades, and I merge the students together to form groups that in industry will typically be a good mix of skills and preferences. And that seems to work quite well. And I'm making groups of about seven.
Okay, so 7's quite a big group, right?
Yeah, it's a big group.
Yeah, okay. But I think what's interesting is that you're prefacing your group work process with quite a lot of introspection on behalf of your students. They need to understand certain things about themselves. And then do you group them, or do they kind of approach each other for groups? Sounds to me like you group them.
I group them.
Yeah.
I make sure that there is an extrovert in the group that can act as the coordinator or the leader. I make sure that there are analytical people in the group. I make sure that the skills and the grades that they have are of similar, or I mean not similar, of different characters, so they can each tackle a different aspect of the course itself or the task.
Okay, sounds very interesting. Thank you. I'm seeing that we've got some voices popping up in the text chat. So Liani's saying for film exercises, we used to let them choose their own groups, but we introduced one exercise where they pick teams and they love getting to know new people and work ethics so much. So we now group them for all 3 exercises, for a halfway semester course. And Roz is saying, I group people who sit far from each other in class to get them to work with people they don't normally work with. All very interesting strategies, these. Itumeleng saying selected on the basis of, Roz, do you want to say some more about that?
I was just going to comment that that's hard to do when you're not in class anymore.
Right.
Now, I guess it would be random in online groups, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. Vim, I see a hand up again. Go for it.
Yeah, one of the things that I experienced, or that I noticed when I asked around about group composition and so on, the thing of students making their own groups, you end up with a few groups where you've got the blind leading the blind, and that group is, the whole group is kind of set up to fail, because it's just the loose sheep that never gets added anywhere else. On the other hand, just averaging out all the groups is also not necessarily a good thing, because then students might feel that I'm being pulled down to become just an average. So it is a delicate balance between letting best buddies become group members, or just completely letting randomly averaging groups out.
And I think what's interesting is it depends very much on how long you're grouping people for and what are the risks associated with the group. So if it's kind of a design course and they're working with that group for a whole semester, or a film course, they're working with that group for a whole semester, it might be very different than perhaps if there were a series of group projects and people were cycling through different groups. Tara is saying she assigns groups randomly. Aviva is, that's interesting. Mixed ability is good as long as the gaps between them are not too big. We're very conscious of ensuring diversity within teams along the lines of race, gender, different skills, etc. Also working with film studies students. Absolutely. So I wonder if anyone wants to unmute and say anything more about this group composition before I offer something that we might think about going forward. Tara, yeah. Am I saying your name right? Is it Tara or Tara? Hello? I see an unmuted mic, but I'm not hearing you. Tara, is that a deliberately unmuted mic? Oh dear, I'm assuming we're having mic problems. If we get it right, please feel free to jump back in. Sorry, mics are so sketchy sometimes. They're sometimes fine, they're sometimes not. Yeah, but please feel free to jump in the text chat and add anything you'd like there. So I think that for me, one of the critical things to think about in terms of putting groups together is to think about the duration of the group. Is this something that they're doing just for a live session, a single session? Is it something they're doing for a relatively short period of time? Or is it something that's going to need to cohere for a whole semester or for some kind of extended period? And if so, how much risk are we willing to put into the process of composing that group? I think that doing some kind of pre-group introspection, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, what do you really want to work on, doing some work like that with the class in advance can really help to structure groups. And while to some extent, I think there's always space for allowing students to group themselves, I don't think that we must ever entirely make that the sole process that we use in terms of grouping, because I think there are wonderful opportunities to challenge our students in different ways by grouping for them. Yeah, potluck teams. I like that idea. It's a nice way to do slightly different teamwork. Okay, Thomas, can we move on to the next slide? So our next slide talks a little bit about the process of strengthening the group. So there are two more things that I just want to chat about generally before we start looking at some of the tools within the UCT system that can support group work. And one of those things that I want to talk about is strengthening groups. So when there are horror stories, often those horror stories in relation to group work are around issues of building relationships within groups and building sustainable practices within groups for people to feel included, for conflicts to be resolved, for people to understand their roles, and so on. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is I think we're going to go just to look at the icebreakers and connectors. And I'm going to ask you to jump, if you don't mind, into the text chat, and I'm going to put a link in for you to the Jamboard. And if you go to frame number 4 in the Jamboard, ideas for icebreakers, and somebody has gotten there already. Well done. So if you go into the Jamboard, I'd love for us to build together some ideas for icebreakers. So do you have any icebreakers that work particularly well in groups? One of the things that people often do is they think about icebreakers as something that you do as a once-off at the beginning just for big groups. But actually, the process of getting to know each other, developing comfort with each other, developing trust in each other, needs to be very much an ongoing process. And it's something that we need to teach our students. Because in many instances, that's not something that we come prepackaged knowing as adult human beings, is how do we build connection, how do we build trust. So I'd love to hear if you have some ideas for icebreakers, for connection building activities within groups. Please feel free to do one of two things. Either jump onto the Jamboard and add a post-it, or add some text and let us know about what icebreakers and connecting activities you use to help your students in their groups connect with each other. But also, if you would like to unmute and speak about it, because it's too many words to put onto a Jamboard, please feel free to do that as well. So let's take just a few minutes and work on that. Okay, you can see some ideas developing, but let's give it a few minutes longer. So ideas for icebreakers. I've done a simple intro activity with Jamboard at the start of the course for everyone to introduce themselves more formally. Absolutely introduce yourself, backgrounds and expectations. I ask a student to draw themselves with their non-dominant hands, then chat to each other about what they have emphasized, left out, etc. That's really cool. I also like that it's upside down. So following the Jamboard, did the exercises from Stilt Writing Workshop for setting out what students wanted and expected from students, absolutely, from peers. Collaborative storytelling. Yes, and that's a fun game always. Tell us about yourself in a Jamboard quote, etc., etc. Use emoticons to say how they're feeling. Okay, so I think one of the things that is interesting in terms of strengthening the group is balancing introductory activities with deepening activities. So very often we've got great ideas right at the beginning around helping people to know each other, and things like introductions and favorite quotes and moments like that are great. And then I think we need to help them kind of deepen their knowledge of each other. So yeah, share the last song you listened to. Something. One of the techniques that I ran into from a colleague is a good and new. So in groups, you get people say, okay, what happened this week for you that was good and new? And that's a little bit less pressured sometimes than just the, how's your week going? Text waterfalls in Zoom, used recently for a class activity and orientation. Yeah. So what I'm suggesting in terms of this idea of developing processes is that it's incredibly important for us to give our students techniques that they could use regularly when they met in order to strengthen the connections between themselves. One of the things that's been strikingly clear for me, particularly I think in the last week or so, is that nationally, South Africans have a lot of work to do to find connection. And that's work that we need to do partly in university spaces as well as all the other spaces that we might have access to. So giving our students opportunities to connect with each other, to find common ground, to find disagreement and to deal with that and to process it is incredibly important. 3 other spaces that I think are incredibly important, but we're not going to get into detail necessarily right now, is to figure out groups and roles. So in the group structure, is there a particular role for people? Is there something, are there defined expectations? Are there defined consequences for not meeting those expectations? How do we practice? What does it actually mean to practice inclusion in a group? And what do we do when we have problems? Because we will have problems. We're human beings, comes with territory. So I'm wondering if there's anyone in this group who has used particular practices for any of those that they would like to share or that they'd be willing to share. Okay, so I think sometimes with group work, the ones, given the pressures of our lives, we often only come to thinking about, oh, there was a hand, Liani. Yes.
I'm so sorry. I now have 2 dogs barking very loudly all of a sudden.
Oh dear, it's because you're speaking.
I think it must be. So with our film production teams, what we ask them to do, they all have to do a production file that contains the legal documents, the release forms, etc. But we also ask them to co-create a team code of conduct. And they're supposed to capture in that code of conduct how they want to be treated, how they want to treat each other, and also a conflict resolution procedure. So, you know, if there's a small conflict that arises, what do they do? If it's a bigger conflict, or, you know, do they channel it somewhere else? At what point do they come to the convener? I feel like we've had varying success with that, because some teams really buy into it and they take it on board and they write their own code of conduct, and others copy and paste something they find online that's sort of just a basic contract or a MOU or some on-set conduct rules or things like that.
Yeah.
So I would actually love to hear if anyone, so it is a suggestion of what we do, but it's also a question around, can anyone give ideas of how we can improve their buy-in terms of making something really meaningful and original?
I think that's both those practices sound a baseline, like very positive practices to take on board, but figuring out how to make students take those on in their personal capacity rather than just to find the shortcut out of it is always a challenge. Has anyone tried anything like that? Yeah, Vim.
And I'm sorry, I didn't want to ask specifically on this topic.
Okay,
so maybe
that's fine. Let's take your question anyway, and then we can come back to Liani's if anyone is thinking on it.
It's just an observation. I mean, I'm not really using icebreakers in my group work. We're a group of engineers. We tend to just take things straight and then don't spend too much energy on the social part of it, which is probably not the right thing to do. But I've been in a number of other group activities where there's icebreakers, and something that bothered me is it seems like the concept of icebreaker is to put the group into some form of out of uncomfortability and awkwardness and so on. Jump up and down, touch your nose, sit back, and weird things. And honestly, that never worked for me. I mean, it's a strange way of icebreakers. I'm not sure whether that is what icebreakers should be doing. And I'm hoping there are other ways to do icebreakers instead of putting people in uncomfortable positions.
So I generally don't like icebreakers that use embarrassment. Being embarrassed in front of a group is definitely a way to get people all embarrassed in front of each other. But I think I'm not sure that that's the way that I would I like to build icebreakers. I like to build icebreakers for, do I now know something about you that I didn't before that helps me to connect with you in some way? So even if it's a small question, what's your favorite song to listen to when you're feeling a bit down? Or what's your favorite spot in Cape Town? I like small icebreakers initially. They're more like connection points rather than, crashing icebreakers. But there are also places, I think, for physical humor and for burning off kind of physical energy, and particularly with younger students. Physical icebreakers that require movement is incredibly useful, much more difficult to do in the online space because we're not able to kind of bring in the body as much. You can do it to some extent with kind of synchronous Zoom sessions. So you can get people to turn on their cameras and you can say, okay, I want you to do this if you feel this way, and I want you to do that if you feel another way. And particularly for younger students, there's a gain in that. There's a physical release of energy, which is useful, but it's not essential. And I think it's sometimes uncomfortable with adults. Yeah, so definitely useful point. But back to Liani's question about whether anyone's had any particular success around codes of conduct. Aika.
Yes, but I would have to say that this is only necessary when you're having dynamics problems. So
right.
It's a two-step process where first I get everyone to articulate what they hope to get out of the course or get out of the project or whatever the assignment is. And usually people will respond to that with quite a bit of buy-in because they get to articulate their own learning objectives. And then the second part to that process is to ask, well, what do we have to do in order to achieve these objectives? And so, for example, if students said that an objective is to gain knowledge about a culture they have never interacted with, and then if the second step is to ask, well, what would you have to do in order to achieve this objective? Then it sort of forces the student to articulate things like, I have to be respectful, or I have to, and then you tease it out.
Have to be open. And
so what does that look like? What does open look like?
What does it look like? Yeah.
Cool. So you get them to then write that down, what that looks like, and be as specific as possible. And then that document that gets written up is a contract. And I've had to use it maybe 2 or 3 times where I did have to have people sign that contract. But I work I work in the English department. So when we have difficult issues, like difficult topics to discuss, stuff like or discrimination or what, then it sometimes becomes important to have a contract that they actually created as opposed to me giving it to them.
And I think what you're talking about there is a kind of staged co-creation process. So rather than just kind of leaving it off to groups to manage the creation of a contract themselves, it sounds very much like you've staged that, right?
Correct.
Okay. And again, this is the process of remaining present in the group work, even if you're not there for it. Okay. Thomas, can we, I think, skip slide 9 and jump straight to slide 10? Thank you. So what we're going to do, folks, I think at this point is we're going to whip through some of the tools in the UCT ecology that support group work. And then hopefully we're going to have some time. We'll just see how we go time-wise. Thomas, can I hand over to you at this point?
Absolutely. Thanks, Johnny. It's going to be an absolute whip through because there's quite a lot. So very briefly, we're going to talk about the technical side of group work through Vula and some external tools. We will not be able to cover any of them in sufficient depth, unfortunately. But if you are interested in any of these tools, please just do contact us, and we can either help you set it up or set up a consultation where we can discuss the particular issue you have and find a good tool for you. I think I should skip peer review assignments because it's not quite related to it. So Vula groups. Groups in Vula are a technical term which can be created with a number of different tools and then can interact with a number of different tools in various ways. If you are going to be using groups in Vula, it's one of the first things you should set up, before even your lessons pages or designs like that, if at all possible, because a lot of things require you to have set up those groups first. You can set up the groups in 3 different ways: through the group manager tool, the ad hoc group feature in site setup, or the section info tool. My preference, I must admit, is for section info. It's best for smaller classes because you have to manually assign students to groups. So if you have very big classes, it's very labor intensive. But if you have, I'd say 100 students or less, I think section info is the best. It's very visible, so students can find the section info tool, see which group they're in. You can create multiple different kinds of groups, and you can assign tutors to specific groups and move students around very quickly and easily. Having set up the groups doesn't mean you have to have all the students in the groups to start. So if you know you want to have 20 groups of 5 students in your class, you can set up in either a group manager or in section info 20 groups, and then later on move students in and out of those groups as needed. More important that you start off by creating those groups first. A co-creation tool in Vula is the Vula Student Pages tool. So this can be added to any lessons page and allow students to either create their own pages with a limited set of functionality, either as individuals or as groups. So this is almost like a bit of like a Google Docs inside Vula. It has limitations. Students can only do a certain number of things inside student pages. But if they are, for instance, as a group, they can each work on the same page, not quite simultaneously, but collaboratively. And for instance, build a lesson for other students to take, or more likely to build a project for you to mark. To do so, you go to lessons. At the bottom of your page, there's an add content, and you have to scroll down to find the add student content right at the bottom. What it'll look like, it'll be this blue box, and every student will see an option to add their own page. And you as the lecturer will see a list of all the students who have created pages and those who have not. If you set up for groups, which you can do via edit, it'll show all the groups which have set up pages and those who have not. There are a range of different features. You can assign gradebook items to these pages. You can set up peer review. You can use rubrics. If you're interested in this, please do contact us for more information. Probably the premier tool, though, that uses groups in Vula is the forums tool. I think we're just not going to have time for this, the pedagogy. The important thing is to have a plan for why you are setting up your forums and some instructions for students on how to engage with said forums. For instance, telling students to build on each other's work, to reply, to quote their sources, connect the learning materials to personal experiences or to other literature, for example. And obviously to remain positive, to be constructive rather than destructive with criticisms and so forth. Always, what was I looking for? Model content, model best practices. So don't assume students know how to use it, but show them how to use it for the greatest benefit for your students, and always prevent, if possible, real world and contextual scenarios, and particularly from a decolonized perspective, perspectives and scenarios that actually might speak to a South African or African context. Because students, the forum tool is a rich text editor, it doesn't require students only to use text. So you can, in fact, students can put in links in their forum posts, they can add images, they can record themselves with a recorder tool. So you can actually do voice notes inside forum posts for a more multimedia and just generally more interesting and more dynamic forum conversation. If you do set up a forum, be present in that forum, answer or reply to the occasional student response, use their name in your response, give full and detailed responses like you would expect them to give. So once again, you're modeling your best practice. And of course, encourage students to respond to each other and build conversations. I think we're just going to have to move past the rules of engagement. It's fairly straightforward. The process of doing so, when setting up a forum, go to Forums tool, create new forum, and under a forum, you'll have a number of topics, and under topics, you have a number of conversations. It is entirely possible to set up one single forum for your entire course and just have different kinds of topics underneath it, particularly if you have a smallish class. I would probably recommend rather that you set up multiple forums. For instance, if you have weekly discussions, you have a different forum for each discussion. The reason for that is, once you, of course, given your title and description, and I'll skip past that for the moment, it is possible to create different topics for every single group that you have created. So if you have a large class and you want groups, rather than all 100 students discussing in one single topic, you want groups of 10 discussing their own topics. So long as you have created your forum and you've created your groups, when you create new topics, you can automatically create topics for groups and then select all the different groups that you have created in your site. And when having done so, each of them will have their own topic place to discuss in. A bit more intimate, allows tutors to find their own students if you want your tutors to be monitoring participation, for example, and keeps the conversations and the threads a little bit more manageable. There are some other topics, other options, for instance, opening and closing forums at specific dates, locking forum topics once they've completed and so forth. I think just consult us or the other resources on the SILT site for more information about the more complicated forum settings. In any topic, you need to start new conversations. Always a good idea as a lecturer to start off the conversation with a post, once again to model best practice and to show the students what kind of things they should be discussing. Of course, this could also be delegated to tutors, particularly as the course goes. And yeah, you'll be able to see who posted that topic over there, when they posted it, and I mean that conversation, and of course by clicking on it, see the message. As instructor, you're able to reply to the message, which should be your primary thing. Grade, if you are grading your interaction. For this, you do need to have set up your gradebook and added a gradebook item beforehand. And in worst case scenarios, edit the message, delete it, or email the author directly. Hopefully you won't be needing to do these. The forums, of course, is a public space, and hopefully you're not getting sort of abusive messages there or needing to delete or edit messages. You can moderate topics so that people's posts don't come up automatically. They have to pass moderation. I wouldn't advise this, particularly with large forums. This means you have to moderate hundreds of topics, hundreds of conversations all the time, just a very intensive process. To monitor and grade participation, you can either go manually through your forum, if it's a smallish forum, and just check the different topics and conversations and see what people are saying, or you can go into the forum statistics and grading tool, which is at the top of your forum bar, and then you get a list of all your students and all the posts they've authored, all the posts they've read, and how many posts they have unread. Particularly if you have large classes with different topics, you may have very high percentage of unread. That's probably not a problem. They shouldn't necessarily be reading other topics' conversations on the same topic, for example, other groups' conversations on the same topic. More important is to see, probably it's mostly about authoring. You're also then able to grade their contributions. By clicking on full text, you'll be able to see every single topic and the text there they've produced, or you have to click through to their message to see what they've actually read. And once again, if you want to grade, you will have to have set up a gradebook and added a gradebook item beforehand. Anecdotal experience from people I've spoken to, making topics, forum topics graded does greatly increase participation. Unfortunately, it's the standard, students only do things for marks. belief. I'm not sure if that's actually true, but it does seem to definitely encourage forum participation if the contributions are graded. Okay. Sorry, I know I'm going through this incredibly quickly, but we are already running out of time for more things. There are a range of tools available in UCT's Google Suite. Google Drive, it's a fantastic place to store documents, to create different kinds of groups which have controlled access. Just a very useful tool in general for collaboration. I do not know what I'd do without Google Drive myself, and students, of course, have access to it through their MyUCT accounts. Jamboard, by the way, is a Google tool. So over here, if you click New, and I think it's More, Jamboard is one of the options there, and students can create their own Jamboards, limited access and so forth, like you can do as Electra. Very quick, very easy tool to set up. Shonali, do you want to talk about Padlet very quickly?
I can. So Padlet is I think of it as a pinboard tool, really, although you can pin multiple things to it. So you can pin video to it, you can pin photographs to it. One of the things that many people have reported struggling with in the current context is that they just can't imagine they can't imagine the people they're working with. They haven't met them physically. And so particularly if you have multiple groups doing things, having a Padlet per group where you can sort of go, these are the people in the group, then, and they can see each other, is incredibly useful. And you can use it as a kind of, like a little group gallery almost. So a picture of the person and some idea of who they are and so on. And that can be really helpful, particularly if you are struggling to access, to kind of keep in your head, who's this group. So yeah, Thomas, that's what I'd wanted to suggest around Padlet.
Yeah, we've had very good responses in our surveys around Padlet. I think it's probably the most popular of the new tools for students because it's quite easy to create posts and you have, as shown on the screen, a visual element to it that isn't quite as easy to see in, like, say, forums, for example.
Can you use Padlet from Ruler, or like how does one go about creating a Padlet?
We have a guide to using Padlets.
I'll put the link into the text chat right now, Roz. You just have to get a UCT license to join the UCT backpack. And then you have very nice rights to create as many Padlets as you need. I'll put it into the text chat right now.
Thanks.
Thanks. I don't think we have time to go through Miro if you still want to have any questions. So shall we just move on to the question section?
So maybe just to point out that Miro is an excellent space and you can get a free educational license. And it's a great space for people who are doing kind of design teamwork. And it has a lot of functionality in a kind of infinite board, which is nice if you're trying to gather things in one place. Liani, what you would do with Padlet is you set up a single Padlet perhaps for a group, and then you can get different students to add things to that Padlet. You might want to do a Padlet per student if your student was like, if you had a small group of students and you were trying to develop like a deep sense of your students over time, or like a sense of what are they curating, what are they collecting, what are they engaging with, you could do that. But I think generally it's better with groups or with questions that you want a group to answer. So yeah. Thomas, there's some questions in the text chat. Do we want to grab some of those?
Sure. Just hope I'm not being drowned out by the sound of rain on my window.
No. We're doing okay here. So Timmerling's question about what approaches do you commonly use for breakaway tutorial group work after a lecture, i.e. MS Teams breakaway groups or multiple links for each group to work in? Yeah. Shall we chat about that briefly?
Sure. Maybe, Timmerling, could you expand on that? I'm not quite sure what breakaway groups. It sounds like you're using MS Teams quite heavily there.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is if we, so after a lecture, you find that you may need to do specific exercises. So reading of X-rays, and you need a group of 7 to be to be all together and have their own tutor or facilitator. Do you guys use your MS Team breakaway function, or does everybody log off and then get an individual group link, and they the 7 then go and open the new link? I'm just trying to find ways in which it can be done a bit more efficiently for the next semester.
Right.
So the trick with MS Teams is to remember Teams is very hierarchical. There is one host. The host must be present in order for the breakaways to work. So you can create breakaways at the end of a session and push people into those breakaway rooms, and then they can leave directly from those rooms. I have no idea, and this is something we might want to test it, Itumeleng. We want to test what happens if you close the main room, if you leave the main room as host. Does that automatically close all the sub-room sessions? Because I do know that Teams is very much like, Teams is, you are in a whole new room. This room has integrity. It has its own setup entirely compared to Zoom. That's a little bit more linked to the main room. So I think we must test that for you and come back to you. What might be useful is if those are going to be stable groups, you could create an MS Teams team for your course and give each of your groups a channel in the team, and they can then set up meetings for themselves to work as and when they want to, which is quite nice. I concur with many of the comments about Teams groups, but I think channels is an incredibly useful thing in Teams if you are wanting stable groups. But if you're going to recreate the groups every week, or if they're going to be different groups every week, that's going to be a problem. Veronica, the fact that we're using Teams here has to do with the fact that we have an external audience as well as a local UCT audience, and timing. When we started using Zoom, Teams was still a mess. Quite a lot changed. Okay. So Teams has grown some stuff. It didn't have a lot of things. I mean, it didn't have breakout rooms when Zoom had breakout rooms, when we needed breakout rooms at the beginning of lockdown. So there was, it has done some growing, but it still has some growing to go. I also happen to like Zoom because I like being able to invite people into rooms and say, choose your own room. And Teams doesn't allow that, unfortunately, but Zoom does. Are there any other questions we're missing? I see a conversation that's happening around the Google Suite. Yeah. Google, you started so well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we let the humans get involved.
So MS Office 365, which is also supported at UCT, it has its own paid version like Google Drive has. Offers pretty much all the same functionality as Google Suite. I don't think they have a Jamboard's equivalent, but they've got Excel, they've got Word documents, they've got a Drive function. In fact, it's slightly better because that's just MS Word online and Excel online rather than a new product. I don't know about its popular compliance. It's probably better than Google's because, yeah, Google just really took a hard turn to the dark side.
I think I'm going to be guided by the fact that ICTS hasn't yelled at us yet to stop using Google. But they have always said to us that it is not the most secure place to, it's not the most secure place to leave personal information. So if you have things like students' names and email addresses, etc., I think ICTS's policy has long been that should be on a UCT drive. I always find that that's the safest and most legal and sensible thing to do with it.
Yeah.
So I would say you could still, I mean, if your students are doing a collaborative writing exercise, that's not going to contravene any POPIA rules. And then you could quite easily do it wherever you would like to do it.
But you probably shouldn't be uploading marks to Google Drive, which I'm sure no one does anyway.
But when one leaves UCT, yeah. So absolutely. So Veronica, what I do is I share everything with my private license as well. And then if I ever, if we have to make a shift out of an institutional space, one of the things that you have to do is you have to organize all the terabytes of information that UCT has been storing for you. And that might mean hours and hours of downloading and stashing. So perhaps there's a kind of space for digital minimalism, at least careful curating of what we keep.
And one tool we haven't talked about so much because it's not a UCT tool, but it is a UCT reality, is actually WhatsApp.
Yeah.
So if you had some comments in the chat with people saying breaking out into WhatsApp groups, Frank, practically WhatsApp's just one of those tools which is just, it's ubiquitous, and it has a very high student, what's the word? Exposure. Students have a lot of exposure to WhatsApp already. So it's kind of a reality whether we want it or not, and not a bad idea to look at how it can be best used in your courses.
So I distinguish between student group spaces that I want to peep in on and student group spaces where they can have kind of free reign to manage themselves. And I think that I would not want like if I had a big undergraduate class, I would not want multiple WhatsApp groups for each of those individual groups in my class. I mean, somebody had a class the other day with 300 groups in it. That's not going to live on my phone. I refuse. I'd go mad. But perhaps if you have a small postgrad group, that's fine. So make choices that fit comfortably with your needs. Folks, it's after 11 and I'm pretty sure that people need to run away. Are there any other pressing questions? Please feel free to pop them into the text chat and we will come back to you on those. Liani, I've noted a question about the peer review in assignments tool, and I'm going to send you some material on that. Well, I'm pretty sure that the rest of the group work team at home is looking for you at this point. Okay, colleagues, thank you very, very much. Please remember that if you have particularly complex arrangements that you are figuring out, and even if you just want some support to think things through with a friend who's interested in what you're doing, please feel free to make a booking. You can grab a SILT consultant and have a chat about what is going on in your course and any questions you may have. I think that Thomas is putting up a link to the course consultations, but it's being resistant. So if you go onto the SILT website, you can find us there. Yeah.
And there it is.
There we go. And Thomas is going to drop that into the text chat. Please remember that's a great way to just think something through before you have to do it in front of, like, I don't know, 500 people or 20 people, as the case may be. Thomas, thank you so much.
Thank you, Shanali.
Thank you for strategic choices around what to share and what not to share. Colleagues, have a lovely rest of your day. I hope you stay warm and toasty and are managing the rainy Cape Townness. Yeah, I think that's probably us for today. Thank you, everyone.